For the first year that followed, we were under the umbrella of another nonprofit, another 501c3, and it just gave us kind of a big brother where we could behave as a nonprofit and learn what that meant. What does it mean to start a charity, to run a charity? How do you make a budget? What's a board of directors? All these things that come with starting a nonprofit. And then for the last 4 years, 4.5, we've been on our own as a charity. And if you could add it all up, what started as these messages coming in after Switchfoot shows, the messages kept coming. And some of them found us from the support of other bands. Some of them came because someone at school had a t-shirt turned inside out and said, hey, you got to read this. Or someone else just wrote down these words and said, hey, please look this up. And people found their way and these messages kept coming. And now there's a whole team of us that work in Florida. We share an office. We have a house where there's always 5 or 6 interns who are college students who put life on hold for a semester. They go through training and crisis intervention, and they're the ones who primarily continue to respond to the messages that come in every day. Emails, notes, letters. And we're coming up on 160,000 messages and emails that we've been able to respond to. We've learned that these have come in from more than 100 countries. And so what that tells us, what we've learned is these are not American issues. And maybe these are not white people issues, and maybe these are not emo issues. But maybe instead, maybe this is part of being alive on this planet. Maybe this is part of being human, and it's part of this human condition that we keep waking up with, we can't seem to shake. And no matter what you think or feel when you hear words like depression or self-injury or suicide, maybe if we're honest, we do all relate to pain and to loss and grief and questions and moments or relationships that we don't know how to let go of. Change that comes really slow, and we wonder if it's ever going to come, if we're ever going to be okay with it. And the whole thing has just been this giant surprise, as you can imagine. We've learned a little bit about what does this conversation look like here in America. And we've learned that there's roughly 20 million of us that struggle with depression, that untreated depression is the leading cause of suicide, that for us in the room tonight, that suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death. And I think the statistic that just shocked me, that stayed with me, was the one that said that 2 out of 3 people who struggle with depression, they never get help for it. And so if you sit with that for a second, what that suggests is the majority of people who live in this place, this really difficult, painful place, the majority of people who live there, they live alone there. And I wonder if that's because of the stigma, and I wonder if it's because of the sense of shame and confusion that just kind of hovers over this conversation and just keeps it silent. And I don't know about you, but I feel like there's these times where I wish I could just put a hand up and say, hey, I need a break. I can't go to work today. I need to talk to someone. I need some help. I'm not doing okay. I'm not doing okay. And yet for most of us, even if you agree that you've been there, you felt that, you are there, I think for most of us, those hands never go up and that stuff never gets communicated. And I think we're afraid of being misunderstood. We're afraid of being judged. We're afraid of being labeled. We buy into the idea that our friends are busy, our family, they're busy, they have enough on their plate, they have enough problems, they don't need ours. We don't want to be a burden. And so we carry our stuff around alone. And we buy into the idea that everybody else is okay, everybody else is happy, everybody else is doing well and put together, and something is wrong with me because I'm the only one who's not. And it's not true. It's just part of being a person, you know? And what allows me to be here, what makes it worth it, and the sense of privilege in the whole thing is we show up on behalf of thousands of messages and conversations with people who allow us to use words like hope and help and believe it, because we hear the stories of people taking first steps, or even the very first step toward getting help. We hear the stories of people sitting across from a counselor for the first time and talking about the experience of feeling less alone because of those conversations. Beginning to let go of things they didn't think they ever could, beginning to, in the face of that, to maybe believe some other ideas or some other behavior. We hear from people, or we see a comment on Facebook where someone says, hey, I'm 100 days sober today. I just got out of treatment and I'm doing this new road one day at a time. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And I feel like I'm living, and I feel like what I was doing for a while wasn't living. We hear from people who just admit that, you know what, for a long time, the only way I knew how to respond to pain was with pain. And it didn't make sense to a lot of my friends. When my mom found out, she freaked out, she was afraid, she didn't understand. There was some asshole at school who, when he found out about it, he said, aren't there enough problems in the world? What are you doing creating more? And that person didn't understand me. That person doesn't get it. But for me, that was an escape, and for me, that was the only thing that brought a moment of relief or release. But I'm starting to believe that maybe there's a better way to live. There's a better way to respond, better ways to cope with pain. And I'm beginning to do that. I'm beginning to live that way. We hear from people that have picked up the phone in a desperate moment, a desperate night, and called a suicide hotline. And in this moment, chosen not to be alone, and in this moment, chosen to be alive. And maybe we meet them a few weeks down the road, and they just talk about the experience of continuing to make those choices, continuing to choose not to be alone, and continuing to choose life. And they say, man, I almost walked away from this whole thing, and yet now I believe that there's a whole bunch of people who care about me, and maybe we get one shot at this thing, and for them and for me, I want to live. I want to do this. I want to be proud of it. I want to fight for it. And so on behalf of all those people and all those stories, that's what allows us to print these slogans like hope is real and help is real. It's what allows us to show up and actually believe it. Like that it's not just cute, but that stuff has a weight to it and it's real. We're coming up on $1 million that we've been able to give to treatment and recovery, not just in America, but around the world, investing in those solutions. We're so proud of that. And then I think kind of coming toward the end here, I think we get equally excited about this word community. And maybe a really simple place to start with community is just this idea that if you're a person, you need other people. And you can use the word you're comfortable with. Maybe created is a word you're comfortable with. Maybe wired is a word you're comfortable with. But that you're supposed to know other people and be known by other people. And you're supposed to love some other people. And you're supposed to be loved by some other people. And not that it's easy, like not that it just falls out of the sky, not that when you find people you may know on Facebook that it just happens, like, but that it's something we actually have to be intentional about, and you have to choose it. And it means that people get to see some parts of your story that aren't pretty and that aren't polished or put together, but people get to meet you in your questions and the hard stuff as well as the good stuff. We hear the stories of people choosing community and choosing honest relationships, and they talk about the experience of feeling less alone because of these little gangs that start to happen. Maybe it's 2 people over coffee, maybe it's 4 or 5, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's a couple times a week. But just people answering the question, how are you? How are you doing?